In this video, we will investigate what's known as the Law of Syllogism, or as I like to call it, the chain law. And we'll start off with this example, a simple if-then statement: if you have a job, then you get paid. And we'll follow it up with a second if-then statement: if you get paid, then you can buy food. And my question is, ultimately, what can you do if you have a job? Well, if we look at our first conditional statement, we start off with the hypothesis that you have a job, which leads us to the conclusion that you get paid. In the second conditional statement, notice that the hypothesis we start with, you get paid, matches the conclusion of the first if-then statement. And the conclusion of the second conditional statement is that you can buy food. So again, back to my question, what would you conclude you would be able to do if you have a job? Well, notice, then you get paid leads right into if you got paid in the second statement. Since those are an exact match, we can more or less ignore them logically and come up with a conclusion. Therefore, if you have a job, then you can buy food. And this is an example of what's known as the Law of Syllogism, which states that given two true conditional statements, where the conclusion of one is also the hypothesis of the other, a third true statement can be made by combining them, which is a bit of a long definition, so let's take a look at it symbolically. We're going to let the letter P represent the hypothesis of the first statement that we had, so hypothesis number one. And we'll let Q represent the conclusion of the first statement, conclusion number one, which means our first statement we could write symbolically as if P, then Q. But notice, we can reuse that letter Q because it also represents the hypothesis for the second statement. We don't need to come up with a new letter for it. We do need a new letter for the conclusion of the second statement, which we will call R. And our second statement symbolically, we can write as if Q, then R. And notice this link, why I call this the chain law. There's a link from the end of one statement to the beginning of the second. And when we see that link, we can ignore it and say, therefore, these three dots representing therefore, our conclusion, if we start at statement P, the first hypothesis, we will end up at the second conclusion. So if P, then R. And we can jump over the link that we've made between the two statements and go straight from beginning to end. So that was a longer definition, a bit of a longer explanation, so let's look at one more example. In the second example are two if-then statements. If you take notes, then you learn something. And if you learn something, then you feel successful. In the first statement, our hypothesis, P, is you take notes. With the conclusion, Q, you learn something. The start of the second if-then statement is you learn something, which is a different hypothesis, but matches in meaning to statement Q. So we will also call it Q. And the conclusion, then you feel successful, we will call that R. Notice the link between the two statements. The conclusion of one is also the hypothesis of the second one, which means we can ignore those two statements and make a conclusion. Therefore, if you take notes, then you feel successful. So in summary, the whole idea behind the Law of Syllogism is given multiple if-then statements. If these statements have a matching conclusion and hypothesis linking the two together, that statement can be ignored and you can create a brand new statement by linking them together just like a chain.